everyone, to our first teen mental health panel. Today we launched our teen mental health report, and the focus of that whole report was we're in a teen mental health crisis, and as a conduit of information, insights across the kids and family media space, we wanted to shine a light on the incredible resources and insights, thought leadership that are available to all of us on this topic. And in collaboration with that, we wanted to bring forward some of the most brightest minds on this topic who we have with us tonight. I will read their bios so that you guys can learn how amazing they are. Rick Weisbord is a senior lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Kennedy School of Government. His work focuses on moral development, the nature of hope, vulnerability, and resilience in childhood, parenting, and effective schools and services for children. He directs the Making Caring Common project, a national effort to make moral and social development priorities in child raising and to provide strategies to schools and parents for promoting in children caring, a commitment to justice, and other key moral and social capacities. And we also have Yalda Yules. Your bio, here we go, Yalda. Is an internationally recognized award-winning research scientist, educator, and author, studying how media affects young people. Her peer-reviewed research has been featured in many news outlets, including NPR and the New York Times. In her former career, she was a senior movie executive at MGM and Sony. Yalda is the founding director of the Center for Scholars and Storytellers, a research organization based at UCLA, which bridges the gap between social science research and media creation to support authentic and inclusive stories for youth. Yalda is also an adjunct professor at UCLA, where she does research on how media affects the social behavior of tweens and teens, and teaches a class on digital media and human development, and is the author of the parenting book, Media Mums and Digital Dads. So I want to thank you both for being here. I always love to give that long introduction because you guys are incredible in everything that you do each day, and we really feel honored to have you on our panel tonight. So thank you. So let's dive in. I think of the question that I had when I started to dig into all of this research was, how did we get to this place? And I know you guys have come at it from different points of view and then the same points of view. So I would love to sort of figure out and unpack. There's many reasons that have caused this crisis, but how did we actually get to this point in time where kids are struggling so much?
Go ahead, Dick.
Should I start?
Yes.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be with both of you. And I'm glad to be talking about this super important topic. Well, the mental health crisis actually began quite a while ago. I mean, it looks like it began around somewhere between 2010, 2013. You start to see this spike in mental health, in depression, anxiety, suicidality among teens. And the pandemic accelerated the rate of increase. So the spike got even steeper during the pandemic, it looks like. And there are certain populations that have been especially vulnerable. Girls are experiencing depression at about twice the rate that boys are. LGBTQIA students are far more vulnerable to depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Rural kids look like they're more vulnerable and they have less access to resources. So all of those things are very concerning. I think there are multiple drivers to this. And one thing I will say that I think those drivers vary by race and class and culture. I think achievement pressure, for example, is a huge issue in many middle and upper class communities. In our data, it's sort of coming up as number one or near number one on things that kids say that they are stressed about. Social media comes up all the time in various forms, various types of social media. In low-income communities, I think very different things are often going on. You know, it's intergenerational poverty, it's intergenerational despair. It's continued marginalization that is a cause of this. So I think it's a puzzle with a lot of pieces, but why don't I stop there and there's lots to dig into here. So.
Yeah, I mean, what he said, but I guess, I do think that a lot of times people want to blame media and social media. And, there are a lot of researchers that have been looking at this. And, I do think media can amplify stressors and mental health issues, but as Rick said, these issues have been around for a long, long time. And I think that, social justice, climate change, school shootings, academic competition, all the things you listed in your report, frankly, are all factors. And it's not just one factor, but what social media does do. And in fact, one of the things that I think is probably super harmful is the access to news right away. So like it feels like you can't escape it.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, we did that study, and we did a study where we asked teens what they wanted to see on in shows, and they put climate as the last thing they wanted to see. And we think it's because it's just overwhelming. It's depressing. It impacts them. So.
Absolutely, to think about, that the planet is burning or the ice caps are melting. That's just a lot, I think, for a teen or a youth brain to take in. So let's
Susie, I would just say one quick thing about this, which is I agree with what Yalda said. There are people who think social media is the sole cause, and partly because the introduction of cell phones happens around 2011, and you see this rise in number of countries. But you also see a rise in anxiety and depression among younger kids, too, kids who are not in social media. You see a rise in young adults that began 50 or 60 years ago. So I really doubt social media is the sole cause of it. I think it's a significant factor, but a lot of the factors in your report, I think, are very much at work. The other thing I would say is that, I think in liberal communities, we tend to talk a lot about climate change, but you also see this spike in conservative communities.
Right.
And there are different sources of despair, I think, in many conservative communities that are driving.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think one of the ones that we should dive into a little bit is obviously COVID-19 and how that affected teens and young adults. And the idea of isolation and loneliness, which, Rick, you talk about as well. And I think the two things together, obviously they played into each other. I wondered if you could talk about that research that you did in terms of how much loneliness you're seeing in the youth and where you think that's coming from and how that's affecting everything too.
Yeah, I mean, the groups, you're absolutely right. And, our Surgeon General was right to say that there's an epidemic of loneliness. And, I think we tend to associate loneliness with the elderly, and there are high rates of loneliness among the elderly, but the highest rates are among young people, 18 to 25. And it varies, some stats say 30%, some say 60%, sort of depends how you define loneliness. But these are really high rates. And to your point, Susie, loneliness and depression brutally feed on each other, right? Like when you're lonely, you start to become more self-doubting. You start to, in social situations, you become much more vulnerable to criticism. You can avoid social situations, which deepens your loneliness, which increases your depression. These things can feed on each other in ways that are very concerning.
Very true. And speaking of the Surgeon General and the fact that he issued a teen mental health crisis, Yalda, I think you went to the summit in LA, and I was wondering if you, in that group, it was 2 days, you guys broke down what's going on, and there was, at least what I wrote, because I wasn't there, I read that I wasn't there. The idea was to come together and figure out some solutions, and I was wondering if you could share some of the high points of that conference and what some of the steps forward that maybe Governor Newsom in California supports, or that could even go across the nation. So I would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, apparently Governor Newsom has dedicated $4 billion in the California budget to social and emotional learning and helping with the mental health crisis in California. And that is through the schools. So hopefully more school psychologists, social workers, et cetera. I mean, the thing about the Surgeon General is he really sort of focused on all sorts of people coming together. And, I first met him December 2021, where it was a group of media people, and he was trying to inspire the media people to talk about and to integrate help-seeking behaviors and other things into their content. But he also, has focused on youth-led movements. That was one of the things that was happening at that summit. Was we talked about youth-led movements, we talked about influencers. We did an event at Creative Artists Agency where they brought Rick Fox in and other people who really care about this kind of issues, and because we really need all hands on deck.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's take 1 minute. We mentioned social media up front, but I think we should dive into it a little bit more. The New York Times posted a recent stat from Pew that said that 97% of teens are going online daily, and 46% are reporting that they're online almost constantly. Having a 14-year-old, who watches TV and the phone at the same time, it's just, I wonder, as a parent, as someone developing media, how do we turn that corner and get better balance and just basically help them find better balance, I guess, is what I would love to figure out.
I mean, honestly, the number one way to do it is modeling. The adults, they learn from what you do. And, I wrote in my book, and I've experienced this as a parent. There were two families. This came from, I forgot whose book, but there were two families that one had used lots and lots of media and one didn't at all, but they were both very loving families, and they talked to their kids, the ones that use media, and the kids were thriving. And in my own family, we are a media family. My brother's kids are not media. I'm not, they are an outdoors, no media whatsoever family. And our kids are both amazing. So, ultimately and you put it in there, authoritative parenting, which is also active mediation. So it's being loving and supportive of your child and your child's media life. Be supportive, but at the same time, have some limits, have some guardrails. Tell them to put down the device at certain times of the day. You put down the device too. And I would say one thing about COVID, there was a study actually that just came out that found that actually young people reported less depression. And they looked at the Monitoring the Future data, which is this data that's been going forever. And it was cross-sectional, but they looked at pre-COVID and during COVID, sort of mid-2020. And they found that some people said they were less lonely and less unhappy. And one of the key factors was sleep. Sleep is a huge, huge, huge issue. And if we can raise awareness about the connection between sleep and mental health, kids were finally sleeping because they weren't waking up that early to go to school. And that is tied to social media as well. So if social media is in the bedroom or when they don't have the impulse control, to be able to stop using it, really, if you can keep it out of the bedroom and you keep it out of your bedroom too, and really impress upon them the importance of sleep, that's critical.
Yeah, I agree on the sleep front for sure. And it's self-care. It's teaching them, as you're saying, modeling it, role modeling it. It's the idea of taking care of yourself so that they do the same with them and they put their device down, they get those breaks, all of that. Absolutely.
One thing I would add, and this comes up in our research, which is preliminary, we have not published it yet, but, kids say that social media has a number of negative consequences on them. And to Yalda's point, one of the ones that comes up a lot in our work is just ugliness on social media, the way people talk to each other, ugliness in the news, scary things in the news, but creepy things on social media that they come across. But they also say that there are a lot of positive benefits for them for social media, that they make new friends, that if you're a lonely or isolated kid, or you're a kid who's different in some way, you're a gay kid, you find other kids who are like you. They're inspired by influencers often in good ways. And so, I think the ship has sailed on this, and parents can also get much more adept at supporting their kids and using social media in positive ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Yalda.
Well, I was going to bring up that Richard and I are both involved with a project that is with Disney called the Choose Kindness Project, which is really they're building and they're investing quite heavily. They brought together a huge alliance of organizations, which Making Care in Common is one of the leading ones. And we're doing a parenting guide to help parents and caring adults understand warning signs, understand cyberbullying, understand sort of giving them conversation guides. They're going to be doing stuff for teachers. They're having PSAs, videos. They introduced it on ESPN. So there are hopefully, with people like you, all these organizations, Disney really had the resources to bring together, like, what is it, 30, 40 organizations that are, we mined all of their incredible work to put together this parent resource that we hope will make it easy, one-stop shopping. Well, not really, but, basically a way that, to help parents guide their kids.
Yeah, and I do. I think to both of your points, I think that we're turning the corner on all of the cyberbullying, and we're finding more and more, and we highlighted some of them in our report too, that TikTok is now, there's a lot of mental health on TikTok too. So it's helping your kids find the resources that they align with to create their best self as well. We're talking next week, and we highlighted them in the report too with Be Me, and their whole platform is to encourage people to be kind to each other, but also to create exercises which are just more fun videos that they can watch on how to feel better about themselves, how to be kinder to themselves, things like that, if we can use, sort of meet them where they are and use that to help them, that to me is, obviously where we'll go. Okay, so let's talk.
Sorry, we've talked about, though, the TikTok thing. I just want to say, though, it does need to be thought of with a grain of salt, because sometimes, and we talked about it at our summit, where we were like combining experts with these influencers, because sometimes, like, there was a whole thing going on about anxious attachment style on TikTok, and my daughter started talking they started and basically there's people that don't really have the deep understanding of the research, and they bring up things and sort of push people different ways. So that makes it all the more important for adults to be around, involved in their kids' media life, so that they can say, that's an interesting point, but why don't you look at this and let's talk about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, for sure. That the ones I was mentioning were the ones that are the experts, but like mixing it in and having younger experts so they're more relatable, all of that. Absolutely, I agree. Okay, but let's dive a little bit into media, because our audience is obviously media development folks. You can talk about 13 Reasons Why for a very long time, and what was learned with that one. This Plainville, I think that's a whole nother conversation in terms of what happened with that show, and Euphoria. And I think we've talked about Euphoria being sort of like a massive PSA not to do drugs, and there's different ways to get to where you want your kids to be and what you want them to see. But I do think there's a wonderful, swell coming with shows like Never Have I Ever and Heartstopper, where it's just really normalizing the, how everyone is different. Everyone has, things that they love and things, that are in their life that they deal with. And I just wondered, you kind of live, y'all, the cross section of media and research and all of that. You must know about even more shows, that are coming along those lines. I mean, I think the mental health media guide stated that there's 7% of scripted TV shows and less than 2% of films address mental health. So we have a long way to go, but I do feel positive about the shows that I know about in development, and I know you do too, and I wondered if you could address them.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually been asked to consult on several shows that are dealing with it. And what I like about it, though, is that they're sort of embedding mental health issues in sort of the ecosystem or in the entertainment media. So it's not like this is a mental health show. I mean, Heartstopper and Never Have I Ever are great examples. So they're, one of them's a fantasy. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it. So one of them's a fantasy show. I do know Teen Wolf, the series, apparently deals with a lot of mental health issues. it's so, and our study found the 13 reasons why, which is why we believe media can be such a great intervention, is we found that after watching the third season of the show, 92% of the teens watching it looked up mental health information and 88% talked to somebody.
Yeah.
Half of those people were adults.
Yeah.
So I feel like, at this age where a lot of, psychological issues start in adolescence and where they're really going through so much and they don't know what's going on, to have accurate information and modeling within these shows and the second screen content, the content around the shows is more important than ever.
I totally agree. Absolutely. I think that, I have a daughter who has anxiety, and for her to see a character that had anxiety, it's representation in its own, in a new form, I guess, but like everyone needs to see who they feel they are on screen so that we can all sort of normalize it and accept it and not have it as anomalies. Totally agree. Another study that I wanted to ask you about, Rick, is that there was a new study that was published by JAMA Pediatrics, and it's the first attempt to capture changes to brain function correlated with social media use over a period of years. And I just wondered if you could speak to that. I know it's new and it's.
I just read it too. So
yeah. It's a little like, okay.
Mitch Brinstein, you know them? Yeah.
Go ahead, y'all. I haven't read it, so y'all, you should take this.
I mean, they gave the same everything. They basically said that kids who use social media more, their brain was responding more to social cues, and the structure was actually changing more. So it was if you're a kid that's on social media and responding, your brain is changing so that you're more responsive to social cues. Now, the reality is the brain changes to every single stimuli in the environment. So, and the kids who were using less social media were responding less to social cues. So, you can read that however you want. There's data showing that it's called Rich Get Richer, where if you're an extrovert and you have a lot of friends, this stuff's really great for you. You can socialize, so those kids are happening. And one of the people, and everybody in the New York Times said, oh, no, this doesn't mean it's causal and blah, blah, blah. But one of the people who was quoted, he was from the Stanford Institute of Social Media, which I thought was really smart. It's like, if I go and play a sports and I'm with my team all the time, I'm going to respond to that. My brain might change too. Right. Responding to social structure. So it wasn't really anything new, to me, but media always picks up on anything when you say it's the brain.
No, I agree with you. And I think that there's a natural sense in me, just curiosity with someone, living in the household with someone who's constantly on her phone. Is she changing her brain? And like, should I know more about this? So that's great to know. I appreciate that. I will sleep better tonight.
Good. That's my goal in life, to make parents stop worrying so much about this stuff.
Oh, that's so funny.
You have to model good sleep habits too for your kids.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so then I think we've talked about meeting teens where they are. I wondered if, Yalda, you could talk about the media that I know when I was at the Air Summit, the teen panel was fantastic to talk about the types of media they enjoyed watching. And I think it would be interesting for this audience to also know the types of shows that they were willing to watch or thought was a good show versus, as media executives, what we think is a good show, because it was a little bit eye-opening for me too.
Wait, now I have to remember. I know they said sex education.
Yeah.
I thought one of the interests, anyway, Euphoria, definitely. I can't remember which ones they said. Can you remember?
Yeah, well, it was those, and then Never Have I Ever, and then also Heartstopper was mentioned as well, just because of the relatability of some of the panelists on that one. And I think it just dovetails back into our previous note that being seen and seeing life the way that you go through life is important to them. So that's really good as well. Okay. I wanted Yalda to give you an opportunity to talk about the second screen research that you guys have been doing. And I know we mentioned it before, but I know there's a lot more to it than that. I wondered if you wanted to share that as well.
Okay, thanks. So we are very interested, and if there are any media makers out there watching this, in fact, we got funding to hire someone to work with producers who are creating content around mental health, and us, and perhaps an advocacy organization, maybe Making Caring Common or NAMI or one of these organizations, to think about how content can. So you're watching the show, let's say you're watching Euphoria, and the kid sees something about addiction, or you see something about anxiety, that we could create second screen content, like some kind of PSA that would go alongside the show, that would maximize sort of the ability now to get accurate information and to get support through content that's alongside the show. And what we found in our study was that, so we did a experiment where we put teens in 4 different conditions, and one of them, they looked at a peer video, and one of them they looked, so they watched the narrative, they watched a show, and then they had second screen content alongside it. And we found that if they had second screen content alongside the narrative, that I think they were twice as likely to say they were going to talk to someone about mental health issues. And then we had a peer video and a celebrity video, and we matched them and saying the same information. And we found that they related to the peer video more, the teens, and that if they watched that one, they were 3 times more likely to say that, that people with mental health problems are not weird or strange. Like in the beginning, they went down 3 times more in thinking that. So sort of normalizing mental illness in a way that felt more relatable. So we're very, very interested in figuring out ways. I mean, we're in the 21st century. We're in 2023. We have ways where machines can talk to each other. We have artificial intelligence. We have all this different stuff, and we should be able to take this content and these stories and find ways to connect it to the real world. And, so that a kid doesn't, I said 92% sought information online. They could go down a dark rabbit hole looking in Google. What if we, help them find the right information through content that is alongside the show?
Right. That's expert based. So it really helps them and moves the conversation forward. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, so switching from media, Rick, you work a lot in terms of helping parents and teachers how to work around and with kids to support them. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that balance that, when you look at a child or a teen and everyone that's around them, I think the parents and the teachers and the environment that they're in really shapes who they are and their mental well-being. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to therapize and medicate our way out of this problem. Let me just start by saying that. And I'm not saying that kids don't need therapy or they don't need medication. Sometimes, certainly they do. And there are huge parts of the country where there's not access to therapists, and that's a big issue.
Yeah.
But I don't think these are the routes out. And we really need to be thinking about prevention. We need to be thinking about the kinds of supportive relationships that kids need that are going to prevent and mitigate mental health problems, be much more intentional about creating those relationships. So just as an example, in our work with schools, we have a relationship mapping exercise where it's really popular among teachers, where all the teachers in the school go through every kid in the building and ask, do I have a trusting, respectful relationship with this child? Mm-hmm. And they put a star next to every kid they have a trusting relationship with. And one of the things you find is there are a bunch of kids, usually girls, who have a lot of stars, and then there are a bunch of kids with no stars. And that becomes your map. And we're going to make sure that every kid, by January or February is anchored to at least one adult. But that's what I mean about being intentional about creating relationships. We should be much more intentional about assuring that kids have a friend at school, especially after the pandemic. Yeah. The number of kids who feel isolated and disconnected in school and don't feel like they belong in school. in terms of academic acceleration, I think we have to slow down to go fast. We have to do the community building and the relationship building first. It's going to prevent a number of mental health troubles. And then there's, I want to hear what Yalda has to say about this as well. But then there's the work with parents, which may be the most important work. And, I think parents are understandably really anxious about this. I mean, so a couple of issues. One is Yalda's point about what you model. One of the things we find is that there are parents who are on social media, are distracted a lot. Kids complain that their parents often aren't really emotionally available or able to listen to them. So both as a modeling issue and emotionally available issue, parents' mindfulness about their use of technology and social media use, I think, is really important. But also being able to take a curious stance with your kids when they're worrying. I mean, by a curious stance, I mean asking, not rushing to judgment, not freaking out which can be hard to do, but asking questions and trying to understand and being a partner with your kid and trying to figure out a pathway to feeling better. And that's going to be different for different kids.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think, well, Yalda, you respond, Rick, as you respond.
No, I mean, I just was going to double click on that. And I really think, Rick's been doing this work for a long time. And I love that school mapping thing. That's amazing. It's a real.
Where's that available, Rick? I haven't even heard of it.
We have it on our website. It's a relationship mapping strategy. And, a lot of our strategies are not, to be blunt, are not popular with schools. This is one schools really want to do. So that's really great news. And now we're doing reverse relationship mapping where kids identify adults.
I love it.
Who they really trust and want to talk to. And we're trying to provide those adults with some training in mental health awareness.
That's so great, because I do think, as a parent myself, I think we do tend to, I am guilty of it. I don't want to betray confidences, but, you get hung up in your own life and you think, oh, my kid's doing fine. They're doing well in school. They're doing XYZ. And maybe they're not. Maybe something is going on. And you go, you ask them a question, or how was school today or whatever, and they answer and okay, all's okay. They're doing lots of activities. But really, I think the curiosity and the listening and, and the, what can I do for you?
Right.
What do you need from me? How can I help you? These kinds of questions, your kid's not going to tell you. Most kids are not going to come to you and go, Mom, I was bullied today, or Mom, I did, one, they're going to be scared about your reaction, because a lot of people do overreact, or they're going to think you can't help, or they don't want to upset you. They think you're too stressed. But if you, so you may think they're okay, but the more you can just say, how are you doing? And the more, broad questions, they'll go fine. If you can be more specific, the better. But yeah, I wish I had done that more in high school.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I have a freshman, so definitely in the how's your day? Great, one word answer, and then you really got to pull back those layers, and try and get in there. So definitely. And I know we talked about COVID, but I'd love to just. There's been a lot of studies about how COVID has changed teens that are now back at school, and I just wondered if there's any resources or guidance that you guys could offer specifically to parents whose kids sort of closed off during COVID and now they're back at school and they're slowly adjusting, but maybe not back to where they were, and wondered what that looked like and how best to help those beyond obviously what you just shared in terms of being present and being curious and all of that. Are there other things that you would recommend or that you could try for children?
Well, I guess I would say a couple things. I mean, just one point I would make, and this is connected to what I was saying about race in class, is there's an anonymous poet who said this, but COVID was one storm, but families were in very different boats. And in the kids I know in middle class and upper class communities, very few of them, I know very few affluent kids who lost a parent or lost a relative or somebody who's close to them. Almost all the kids I know in low-income communities have lost somebody that's close to them.
Right.
And so there's a real issue of grief and that a lot of kids are going through, and helping kids work through grief in low-income communities, which I think is quite different than what's going on in affluent communities. But, you know, I especially think now that kids often need help navigating getting back into school. And parents can do things like role plays with kids if they're up for it, about difficult peer situations that they're in, that can be helpful. And sometimes kids need access to multiple communities too. There's, you know, for a lot of kids, their classroom community doesn't work for them. So they may need an after-school community or go to summer camp, and those communities become very important. And helping your kids access a variety of communities can be very helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually where media can be helpful, because some kids that are, you know, like playing games, video games, parents hate video games, but there's so much research actually showing it teaches cognitive skills. It can connect you social or emotionally. The FDA has even approved a video game for ADHD.
Wow.
So counterintuitive, right? So, but they, you know, they're social. They can be, you know, some kids, you know, that may be a social lifeline, and a parent judging it or wanting to take it away from them may be harming their child's more than they, you know, mean to.
Well, and that's obviously due to the advancement of technology too, that, you know, playing a video game now over the web where you're playing it with, you know, tons of people, that changes sort of the experience compared to like 15 years ago when it was singular and in your own den, you know, by yourself. So I totally agree with that.
You know, I would just say one other thing, Susie, which is I think that, you know, my sense, and we don't have a lot of data yet about this, so I'm not sure I'm right, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. But my guess is what we're going to see from the little data I've seen and from our focus group is we have a teen mental health crisis, and we also have a parent mental health crisis.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
There are a lot of parents of teens who are really struggling right now for a variety of reasons. I mean, we're all, you know, a lot of us, including myself, this has been a really hard few years.
Yeah.
And anxiety and depression that is amplified a lot by our teens' anxiety and depression.
Mm-hmm.
So everything we can do to support parents right now, you know, is going to be really helpful. Helping parents connect to each other, helping parents join family support programs, helping destigmatize anxiety and depression for parents. All those things I think can have big impacts on parents themselves, but also on teens' well-being.
Well, and families, therefore, the greater community, like flowing that out. You know what I mean? I love that. Mm. Okay. So question for you. I love the idea of reports and discussions. And y'all, you know this, but I love the idea of, okay, what next? So what are maybe 5 things that you guys would love to see happen in the next year in terms of teen mental health? Because I'd love to have this conversation 6 months or a year from now and look at where we are and how we've progressed. So I wondered what you guys would look for most.
Y'all, you want to start? Yep.
No, you go. I'm just going to say what he said.
And everyone should know I did not give them a heads up that I was asking this.
I would really, I mean, the things that I would really prioritize is I do think in many rural communities, many low-income communities, we need many more mental health providers. I mean, that's really like fundamental, and that's a huge problem in the country. But more generally across the country, I would really like to see us focus on 2 things. One is making sure teens have strong relationships and that they're in relationships that are not depleting, but energizing, and helping kids find meaning and purpose, which I think is another huge part of this. And, you know, really thinking in our schools, our after schools, our communities about activities that are likely to help kids find help them uncover their identity and do an activity that is really gratifying and meaningful for them.
Mm.
Yeah,
And a lot of research that, and I'm not talking about having one purpose that defines you for the rest of your life, but meaningful activity is very protective against a whole range of mental health problems.
Yeah. I would say there's three things. One thing is, obviously, I would love to partner with a few different shows and do the second screen and see if we can measure and see if that, that leads young people to resources that can be supportive.
Yeah.
I would also love, destigmatizing. There are so many populations still who there's a lot of stigma around seeking help and seeking support, and media can help with that too, and really representing that these are things we all go through and we all feel, and especially for men to talk about their emotions more, and boys. I would love to, just and destigmatize also like neurodiversity. Like, I think that a lot of people, what Rick said about we're not going to medicate or therapize our way out of this. Like, that really resonated with me, because I think some of this is just life and building resilience and building that muscle of like, okay, I can get through it. And I can find different ways. I can seek support. I can meditate. I can go out in nature. I can get enough sleep. There are ways, things that we can all do that can help your mental health. And sometimes you just have to get through it. And so to Rick's point, I remember I watched the MTV White House special on mental health. And one of the girls, she was from the indigenous population, and she was having mental health issues. And she tried 2 therapists, didn't work. And the only thing that worked for her was she started a community organization to help others. And that helped her feel better. So there's all these different ways we can, if we don't feel like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me, I'm feeling these things, and we can make people feel like it's okay. We all feel these things. And we all have to get through it. And here's some things, real strategies, hopefully we'll get to a place where people feel comfortable, and don't feel like they have to medicate,
Right.
As their only option.
I think we have grown up, our kids are growing up in a country where there's, it's hyper individualistic. And hyper attention to the self and how the self is doing all the time. And, one thing I'm conscious of, again, middle and upper class communities, I go to the playground, I can see parents who are noting their kids' moods every 10 minutes. That must make you sad, or that must make you angry, or that must make you frustrated. And, as Yelda said, it's really important to help kids identify and articulate their feelings. It's especially important to get boys to identify and articulate their feelings. But the frequency with which we're doing this, and the hyper attention to the self in the culture and how the self is doing all the time, I think can cause kids to be too preoccupied, many kids to become too occupied with their feelings and turn their inner lives into theater. And often much better for kids to focus on how other people are feeling. And if they can focus on how other people are feeling, and to Yalda's point, to get involved in helping other people.
Yeah.
If they focus on how people are feeling, it's meaningful. They're likely to develop closer relationships, which is one of the strongest and most robust sources of well-being that we have. And they're likely to get relief from this constant focus on how they're feeling all the time.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. And I actually do believe that this generation, Gen Z, is changing, and Gen Alpha, even though we are overparented, but that's very highly resourced parents. But I see a lot of hope in this generation, that they are less worried about consumption, that they see the systemic injustice, that, I agree, we are way too individualistic. That is probably, remember Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, since then it's only gotten worse. But I hope I feel like this generation is sort of seeing how we screwed it up, and hopefully they will start to lean on each other more.
Yeah. And, I read some of a report that you were talking about empathy too, Rick. And just, I think that is a quality that every human has to have, right? And doing good for others. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. Volunteering for this organization over the last 6 months has really changed me and really helped me meet amazing people, but helping people understand what's going on and how they can advance their career is rewarding too. So I think the idea of giving back to help yourself is something we should all embrace too. I really do.
Yeah.
Okay, questions.
Yes, we have a question from LinkedIn. So it was asked by Karen, and she said it's important for considering parents who also may be at loss for coping with their teens' mental health. Where can they find the help?
Well, the Disney Choose Kind resource, kindness resource.
When is that coming out?
But I think Making Caring Common has quite a lot of resources.
Yeah, we have there. There are a number. I think NAMI has resource, National Association of Mental. Is NAMI National Association of Mental Illness? Is that what that is? Yeah. Has resources. There are a number of programs for teens out there. If somebody wants to email me, I'm delighted to share these resources. They're not, I don't have them off the top of my head, but there are a lot of resources out there for parents.
Yeah, and NAMI's really great.
The Disney Alliance website is a great place to start.
Yeah, we're happy to share that too.
Well, and your Making Caring Common project, that has a lot of resources. At least I found a lot of resources on that one, Rick. Not to just promote you, but I just found that really insightful.
Oh, good. We don't have a lot of resources yet. We will, about what to do with your kid.
Yeah, more about what, yeah.
It's more about prevention. But
yeah. Okay, cool. Caroline?
That was the question that they had, but a lot of people were commenting on sort of the next steps and how that was really important and looking to the future. So maybe speaking a little bit more on the next steps of what's to come.
I think more than anything, we'd love to invite you guys to continue the conversation so that we can all talk about how to improve things for teens going forward. I really do feel we're incredibly invested just in kids and family media, but also just those working across all the verticals and how we can best help them do their best work so that we can help families, teens, and in general, everyone in media. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many levels to this question. There's at the individual level, what we can do. And, I think if you're doing okay, you should try to reach out to somebody who's not doing okay.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
And if there's a teen in your neighborhood or in your life who you think might be lonely, reaching out to that person can be really helpful. And then there are things that we should be asking our policymakers and politicians and community-based leaders and faith-based leaders to do around this. And, creating out more opportunities for people to connect in meaningful ways. I mean, even in city planning, creating spaces where parents can gather, making it easy for parents to gather, creating family support program. I mean, there are a lot of things at different levels. And then there's the media level, which Yalda knows a lot about, which can be super helpful too right now.
Yeah, I mean, and we're talking to a few people, and this is sort of came from the Surgeon General's work too, that media can shift hearts and minds, and if we harness the power of the stories and just shift the hearts and minds, and are alongside it thinking about policy, we can change policy. Politicians have to listen to their constituents, and narrative plus policy is, if you look at the LGBTQ plus movement, that was a really powerful shift. And a lot of that comes from the storytelling. So the more that we're really thinking about it, and there's so many stories like Never Have I Ever, or all of these stories that have such powerful content in them. If we could just, put some resources around, because the content people don't have time to really think about how can I maximize this impact, but they all want impact.
Right.
you know, and so we have some resources and we're trying to get more so that we can help the content people really maximize the power of what they have created to, you know, help young people and help all of us.
Yeah, I absolutely. And where we can be a megaphone to all of that, please include us and we will do it. Okay, well, I can't thank you both enough. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you for being a part of this week with us where we talk about this topic that is near and dear to so many of us. We appreciate the work that you do and for your time tonight. And hopefully we will continue this conversation soon.
Thank you, Susie. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I didn't thank you at the beginning. This is really great. And your report's amazing.
Oh,
and I'm honored to be on a panel with Dick. So
it's great to see everybody. Be well and take care.
Okay,
All right,
bye.